Hello everybody, we are still busy with paper 1 today and we are going to work through the financial mathematics sections for grade 12 and for your upcoming exams. Let's get started. So you have your paper in front of you and you have your pen out and we are going to work through the financial sections so that we can make sure that we are ready and geared up for our upcoming exams. We are working through November 2023 and you will normally find your financial mathematics questions in question 6 or 7 in your November paper. Let us get started on question 6.1. Patrick deposited an amount of 18,500 into an account earning R%, right? Interest per annum compounded monthly. All right, so let's just highlight the important things over here. We have 18,500 at R%, so we don't know the percentage, the rate, the interest rate, and we also know that it is compounded monthly, and it says that after 6 months, his balance was 19,319.48 cents. So that means that he earned up to 19,319.48 cents. All right, we need to find out what is the interest rate. So the first thing we're going to do is, what do we know? We write down what we know. So we have 6.1. We have our P value, which is his initial amount of 18,500. We also know our interest rate is going to be R over 12. Why is it over 12? Well, that is because it is compounded monthly. We also know that the N value, which tells us how many installments were made or how many payments were made, is 6. Only 6 payments were made. And we also know that our accumulated amount or our final amount is going to work out to 19,319.48 cents. So what we want to work out is what our R value is over there. So let's put this all into our formula, and our formula is A equals P bracket 1 plus R to the N, or 1 plus I rather, 1 plus I, the way you see it on your formula sheet. Right, subbing in what we know, which is A, 19,319.48 equals P, which is 18,500, bracket 1 plus, and what we're going to put in I is R over 12. And we know that our N is 6. And now what we're going to do is we're going to divide by 18,500 on both sides. Let's just move up. So we're going to divide by 18,500 on both sides to get rid of the 18,500 on the right-hand side. We are trying to find R. Right, now we are going to have 19,319.48 divided by 18,500 on our left-hand side. That is equal to 1 plus R over 12, and it's in brackets raised to the 6. Now, in order for us to get rid of the exponent over here, we will need to root both sides. We are going to take the 6th root of both sides, so the 6th root of this side and the same on the right-hand side. Okay, and what is going to happen is we are going, the 6th root is going to cancel that exponent that is raised to the 6 over there. And we now have just 1 plus R over 12 on its own on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, we have the 6th root of 19,319.48 divided by 18,500. And we are going to try to get this term on its own. So I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides. So let us show us subtracting 1 on both sides. And that gives us what is left on our left-hand side. And at this moment, I still have not put anything into the calculator because I do not want to avoid rounding off too soon. Very important not to round off too soon. So at this moment, I can now put this all into the calculator over there. So when I put it into the calculator, I should get a value of, let's do it together. So I'm going to get my 6th root of, and I put my fraction button, 19,319,48, all divided by 18,500, subtract 1, make sure that minus 1 is outside of the root, and I get 0, wrong button there, I've got 0, 0, 0, 0, 7, 2, 5, and I'm just going to put dot, dot, dot. I'm not going to round off just yet. And as we can see, now I've got to multiply by 12 as well. So I times by 12 on both sides, times by 12 on both sides. That is because I want to get R on its own. I want to know what the interest rate is. Okay, so let's do this. When I put that in my calculator and I times by 12, I am going to get 0,087, and I mustn't forget that this is a percentage. 0,087 equals my rate, but I want my interest rate, so I've got to multiply by 100, which gives me my percentage. So when I multiply by 100 on both sides, times by 100 on both sides, I will get my interest rate, which is 8,7. 8,70. So I can just leave it as 8,7%, and that is my interest rate. Okay, so we used our grade 11 formula, which is A equals P bracket 1 plus I to the power of N. Okay, now we're going to move on to question 6.1.2. 6.1.2. The question says, calculate the effective interest rate. Now, we should know our formula for effective and nominal interest rates, and so I'm going to write that down. That is not on the formula sheet. This is something that we need to remember. 1 plus I effective is equal to 1 plus our I nominal over our compounding period to the power of our compounding period. Remember, our effective interest rate is a yearly compounding period, so it will be over 1. So we can leave it as just I effective. All right, what we do know is our nominal, which is on our right-hand side in our paper over here. We can see our nominal is what we just worked out. We worked out that our nominal is 8,7%. So we've got our nominal interest rate, but remember it is a monthly interest rate. So let's write that in over here, 1 plus I effective. If you want to find out the effective interest rate for the year, we are going to put in our nominal, which is 8,7%, and that is over 12. Now we can either write it as 8,7% over 12, or we can write it as 0,087 over 12. This is another option that we could have put over there. Okay, so that is what I have there. And what we want is we want to find out what our effective interest rate for the year is. So what I'm going to do is to try to get the effective interest rate on its own, I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides. I'm just going to put a minus 1 there, minus 1 over there. And I've got I effective is equal to, and I've got 1 plus my nominal interest rate, and I'm putting it as a percentage, raised to 12. Remember, it is monthly minus 1. And all I do now is I simply put this into my calculator, and I will get the value for my effective interest rate. When I put it into my calculator, I get my 9,06, and that is a percentage. Remember, if you do not write your answer as a percentage, you will not get the final mark. Let me just make my 9 look like a 9 over there, 9,06%. All right, that was 6.1. Let's look at 6.2. So 6.2, Kuda bought a laptop for 10,000 Rand on the 31st of January in 2019. He will replace it with a new one in 5 years' time. 5 years' time. On the 31st of January 2024. That is indeed 5 years. And the value of the old laptop depreciates annually at a rate of 20% per annum according to the straight line method, after how many years will the laptop have 0 rand? So firstly, just a few things that we need to remember is this is depreciation, and it is straight line method. So we are looking at the formula A equals P 1 minus, and this is straight line, so it's going to be, let me just get rid of that, it looks like an I. It's supposed to be 1 minus I. And don't forget the I is going to be multiplied by n over here, not raised to the power n. This is straight line depreciation. So let's first write down what we know. We know that our P value, our initial amount, the amount that he bought the laptop for, is 10,000 Rand. We also know that our interest rate is 20%, so 20 over 100, right? Or we can say 0.2, okay? Our interest rate is 20 over 100 or 0.2. And we also know that our final amount that we want is going to be 0 Rand. We want it to be 0 Rand. So that's going to be 0. What we don't know is N. We don't know N, we're going to find N. They asked us, after how many years? So they want to know how long will it take, and N will tell us how many years it will take. Right, so let's put this all into our formula. We know our P value, so we've got A, which is 0. Let's rewrite the formula. A equals P 1 minus I times N. So we have A, which is 0. We have P, which is 10,000. And we have 1 minus I, we said is 20 over 100. Our interest rate is 20% times N. We don't know what N is, so N stays N. Right, what we're going to do now is we are going to divide by 10,000 on both sides. So we divide by 10,000 on both sides. What we notice is 0 divided by 10,000 simply stays 0. So we have 0 on our left-hand side is equal to 1 minus 20 over 100 times N. And what we're going to do now is we are going to, what I think would be the best thing to do is to take this to our left-hand side, right? And that will give us positive. So essentially what we are doing is we are adding 20 over 100 times N to the right-hand side, and we are also adding it to the left-hand side. So we're taking it to the left-hand side, transposing it, and it will change its sign. So what do I have now? I have 20 over 100 times N on my left-hand side, and I got rid of it on my right-hand side. That is equal to 1. And what I'm going to do now is I want to get N on its own. N is over here, I want to get it on its own, so I'm going to divide by 20 over 100 on both sides. So 1 divided by 20%, or 1 divided by 0.2, N is equal to 5. And that tells us that it will take 5 years. The question was, after how many years will the laptop have a value of 0 Rand? Therefore, 5 years is my answer. All right, let's have a look at the next one. It says that Kuda will buy a laptop that costs 20,000. In order to cover the cost price, he made his first monthly deposit into a savings account on the 28th of February 2019. He will make his 60th payment, so they're telling you how many payments he's going to make, and it is a monthly deposit. Now remember, when we are monthly deposit, we are looking at our PV or our FE formulas, right? So, and it says on the 31st of January 2024, he makes his final 60th payment. The savings account pays interest at 8.7% per annum, compounded monthly. Calculate Kuda's monthly deposit into this account. So if we are working out his monthly deposit, can we see what we're trying to find? Now, if we know our FV formula and our PV formula, what is the monthly deposit? That is your X value. Let's write down the formula. Because it's a savings account, we are dealing with your FV formula. I'm going to write down the formula so we have it on our page over there. So the FV formula, future value, is FV equals, and we have a fraction, we have X, block bracket, 1, in open bracket, 1 plus I to the power of N minus 1, close my bracket, all over I. So that is my FV formula. And what do we know so far? We know that we are trying to make 20,000, right? He wants to buy a laptop that costs 20,000. So that is my FV. FV, we always write down what we know. So we know what we are looking for. That is 20,000. We also know that our end value is going to be, remember, he's going to make 60 payments. So that means that our end value is going to be 60. And then we also know that our interest is 8.7% monthly. So we can write it as 8.7% over 12. Remember, there are many ways you can write this. 8.7 over 1,200. Or you can write it as a decimal as well. I'm just going to show you all the ways we can write this because it does help us out. Just one more so we can see. If you have it written like this, you are right. You can write it in these ways. So I'm going to use this one. And what are we looking for? We are looking for the X value. We don't know his installment. So let's sub everything into our formula. So we have 20,000, our FV is equal to, we don't know what X is. 1 plus, we do know our interest, so 8.7% over 12, right? Remember when we do this way, when we have it this way, we're using our percent button on our calculator. Okay, and that is N is going to be 60 minus 1, close our bracket, all over. Again, whatever we write over here for I gets repeated at the bottom. So we have 8.7% over 12. Right. Okay, so 8.7% over 12. All right, let us get started. So we need to find X, and we are going to get X on its own. So X is over here. We want to find the installment. What we're going to do is we're going to multiply by the denominator on both sides. So we are going to multiply by 8.7 over 12, 8.7% over 12. And I'm going to do the same thing to my right-hand side. So it's going to times by 8.7 over 12, 8.7% over 12. Let's see what we have. Remember, this will fall away. And on my left-hand side, I will simply have 20,000. And I'm not going to work it out just yet, times 8.7 over 12. Don't forget that percent if we are using it in this way. All right, and now we still have X over there, and we have this block bracket, and we need to get rid of the block bracket. So what are we going to do to get rid of the block bracket? We are going to divide both sides by the block bracket. So I'm going to divide the right-hand side by my block bracket, 8.7% over 12 raised to the 60 minus 1. Okay, close my bracket. And I'm going to do the same on my left-hand side. Okay, now let's see what we have left. Remember, this whole bracket will fall away because we divided it out. And on my right-hand side, I simply have X, which means that when I work out this in my calculator, I will have the answer for X. So let's put that into our calculator now and see what we get for our installment. So when we put that into our calculator, we should get a 267,2611, and we are going to round it off to 267,26. Right, so we've got 267,26. There is my X value over there. And the question said, Kuda will buy a laptop that costs 20,000 in order to cover the cost price he made for his first monthly deposit. So we're asking what is Kuda's monthly deposit into his account. So his monthly deposit is 267,26 over there. All right, the next question says, and this one is separate, it's different, it's not got to do with Kuda, and we have a new person, it is Tino. All right, and this question is actually very interesting because it says Tino wins a jackpot of 1.6 million, right? 1,600,000. He invests all his winnings into a fund that earns interest at 11.2% per annum, compounded monthly. He withdraws 20,000, right, from that amount, from that fund that he put in, right, that's gaining interest. And his first withdrawal is exactly 1 month after his initial investment. Okay, so that's normal, right? Normal, 1 month after. How many withdrawals of 20,000 will Tino be able to make from this fund? So I need us to understand quickly before we get started. Firstly, let's talk about the PV formula. So the PV formula, right, which I'm going to write quickly on the board. So our PV formula is PV is equal to X bracket 1 minus 1 plus I to the power of negative n, close my bracket, all over I. Now, what does the PV formula do? What does it do? If I have a loan, we always associate the PV formula with a loan. Right, so if I owe an amount of money, a large amount of money, that's this money here, right, and I pay an installment, which is X, right, what happens to the money, the large amount of money? It gets less, right? It gets less, but while it gets less, interest is added, right? Interest is added on what is left because you haven't paid up the loan fully. So interest is added on what is left. Now let's not think of it as a loan. Let's think of it as an amount of money. An amount of money. PV is an amount of money, right? So we have an amount of money, right? As I take out 20,000, so X is your 20,000, the amount of money gets less, right? But it still grows on what is left. Because remember, Tino invested his winnings, but he's drawing out 20,000. So the money is getting less because he's taking 20,000 out, but it is still growing. It's still growing in interest, just like a loan would. And so that is why we are going to use the PV formula for this question. Even though it is a winning jackpot, it is not a loan, but we are going to use the PV formula. It is an amount of money where we remove the X amount, which is an installment, the amount of money gets less. Right, so his PV is 1,600,000, okay, and his installment, his amount of money he's taking out every month, which is his X, is 20,000, and we already have all the other information, which is our I, which is 11.2%, and it is monthly, 11.2% monthly. Let's make that look like a 2, right? And then we don't know, what don't we know? We don't know our N value. We want to know how long can Tino withdraw 20,000 every month, you know, and get to use that exact amount of 20,000 every month. How long will he be able to sustain that? So eventually the money keeps getting less, and we want to know, well, when will it be 0? It's almost like, when will the loan be paid off? But it's not a loan, right? Okay, let's go. Let's find N. We know when we're looking for N, there is most likely going to be logs being used. So let's get N on its own. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to times by my interest, which is 11.2%. So times 11.2%. Oh, I'm running out of space here. 2% over 12, and I'm going to do that on both sides. So I'm going to times this side also by 11.2% over 12. Right, what do I have left? Let's see. On my left-hand side, I have, oh, I think I added a 0 in the wrong place there. Let's just see. let's just rewrite it, 1.6 million or 1,600,000, and that's being multiplied by, it's being multiplied by 11.2% over 12, and I have 20,000 bracket 1 minus, and I have my block bracket still there. I'm still looking for n. Okay, remember this falls away. Okay, now we are going to still try to get n on its own. N is over there, so we're going to get rid of that 20,000 by dividing by 20,000 on both sides. Okay, so the 20,000 is going to fall away. What am I left with? I'm left with, on my left-hand side, I've got 1,600,000 times my interest rates divided by 20,000. Okay, so I now have just the block bracket left. So I'm going to not write the block bracket anymore. I have 1 minus 1 plus 11.2% over 12 to the negative n. Now, the best thing I can suggest for you guys is to not get confused and to, let's see if I can do it with green, okay, and to take this whole term to the left-hand side. It's a negative term, right? It's a negative term. I'm going to take it to the left-hand side, okay? I'm going to take it, it's a minus bracket, I'm going to bring it to the left-hand side, and what's going to happen is the sign is going to change. So it's going to become positive, right? 1 plus 11.2% all over 12 to the negative n. Right, okay, so remember what was it? I'll just rewrite it because we can't see it. I wrote all over it. So let me just rewrite it there. So what was it? It was minus, remember that whole term? It was minus 1 plus 11.2% all over 12 to the negative n. So what I did was I took this whole term to the left-hand side and changed its side. I transposed it. I basically added it on both sides. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this term over here, this whole fraction there, and I'm going to take it to the right-hand side. So that's going to become minus 1. Right, okay, and now I've got, and this helps us out because a lot of the time we get confused with that minus sign, right? So not get confused between that minus sign, take the negative term to the left and subtract that fraction over there. Okay, so what do I have now? So what you'll notice is I am ready to do logs because I have an exponent, right? An exponent over here that I'm looking for. I have my base and I have this over here. And so if we're going to do logs, remember you get a mark for using logs correctly. You're going to say log, right, of the base, and the base is this over here. This is your base. This bracket here is your base. So it's bracket 1 plus 11.2% over 12, right? Of log base of, and the of is the answer on the right-hand side over here. So that's going to go there. So you're going to put a bracket here, 1 minus, and you're going to put that in there. Can you see I didn't put anything in the calculator yet? However, if this worked out nicely, this term over here, you could have put this into the calculator and worked it out. That would have been okay, right? And that over 12, all over 20,000. And our answer is going to be our n value, which is equal to negative n. Right, so now we're trying to find n, and I'm going to have to put this into the calculator. I'm going to use the log button, right, that has the 2 blocks, so it looks like this, log, right? I always do my G's like that, and then it's got a little empty block there and an empty block over there. You want to use that button, right? And then you're going to put this over here into this block there, and you're going to put this over there, and we're going to work out what n is, negative n is. And when we do work it out, we get negative, we get negative 147.79 ... And what we need to know that is equal to negative n, And the question is, let's go back to the question. The question said, how many withdrawals of 20,000 will Tino be able to make from this fund? Well, we know for a definite, if N is equal to 147,79, right, then he definitely will be able to make 147 withdrawals of 20,000, but he wouldn't be able to make 148 because of this decimal, right? It is not exactly 148, but it is definitely 147 withdrawals is the answer there. Withdrawals. He will make 147 withdrawals of 20,000. All right, grade 12s, let's just quickly go back and let's see, where were you getting your marks for each question? So I'm just going to make it small to go back, but I'm going to go through each one. So let's look at 6.1. If we look at 6.1, it was worth 3 marks for the very first question. So your first mark is for N. Getting N right. Where must N be? N in the formula. So N over there was your first mark, and then substituting in the formula. So substituting in the formula here, the 19,318.48 cents and your 18,500 into the correct formula would be your second mark. And then your final mark for 6.1 was for the answer, right? And the answer as a percentage. If we didn't write it as a percentage, we would not get that answer mark. For 6.1.2, it is 2 marks for the effective interest rate, and it is a formula that you must remember. So the very first mark is for substituting into the correct formula. So you sub into the correct formula, you're subbing in your 8.7% over 12, and also getting that correct N value in there. And then you get your answer mark. So that is 2 marks over there. 6.2.1. 6.2.1 was 2 marks, and the very first mark that you're getting is for the substitution into the correct formula. So this, you're writing down what you know, but you're getting your very first mark for substituting into the correct formula. That is the straight line formula. If you substitute into the incorrect formula, if you use compound, you would not get your first mark. And then you get your mark for your answer as well, which is N equals 5 or 5 years. The next one, 6.2.2, right, that is 4 marks, and that is using the FE formula. So 6.2.2, Kuda will buy a laptop for 20,000, and our very first mark is our interest. So this is usually a standalone mark, so wherever you put your interest, even if it's in the wrong formula, you will still get it right. So please be careful, get that interest right. Remember, I showed you there are a few different ways you can write that interest. Get that interest rate correct. You will get the mark. 1 mark for that, and then 1 mark for 60, and then a mark for subbing into the correct formula. So here's your formula, right? Okay. A mark for subbing in 20,000 and everything into the correct formula. So 60 and your I, you get the mark even if it is in the incorrect formula. So you will get marks. Don't not do the question. If you have some knowledge of what is your interest rate, how many months, put it into a formula. And then your final mark is for your answer mark. So you're getting 4 marks there. And it is also, be careful, think about it. Think about which formula you need to use. And then our last one, which is 6.3. Our last one, 6.3. This one was using the PV formula. Even though it was lotto winnings, the very first mark is I. And that is, again, a standalone mark where you have the correct interest rates. And then the next mark is for substituting into the correct formula. That's obviously using the PV formula, so subbing into the correct formula. And then guess what? The next mark is for using logs correctly. So at this stage over here, we are working out, but here is where you are getting the next mark for showing the log correctly, use of logs, correct use of logs. And then for getting N, and it's usually for the answer that you've got out of your calculator, which is that negative 147.79 equals negative N. That's your next mark. And the final mark is for understanding that it wasn't 148. We didn't have to round up. We actually had to round down because you could only make 147 full withdrawals of 20,000. So that is our our mark allocation. I hope that you had fun in this lesson, and I hope that you will work through as many papers as you can and do well. Let's gear up, let's get those marks, let's crack that distinctions and get going with good marks in grade 12. Thank you so much for joining us.